So we're going to cover attribution now. Attribution is going to be under measurement. So we've spoken a lot about different types of campaigns that we run, whether what part of the funnel it's in, and now we get to the point where we have to measure success in some way. That's really the big reason that the industry has switched more towards digital over the last decade or so, because it comes with this added value of measurement. But if we look at the data wrong, then having reporting is actually a lot more detrimental than beneficial to us. To start, just define attribution, and we're going to define it as the process of assigning credit to each touch point in a user's journey leading to a conversion. To clarify, attribution is not incrementality. Incrementality is a separate thing where we're saying, hey, would this conversion, would this purchase take place if we never showed the user our ad? That is not what we're dealing with attribution. That's a totally different topic for a different time. Within attribution, we're assuming that our ads that the user saw led to the conversion. And we're really just deciding how do we split up the credit if there are multiple touch points before the transaction. So this is an example of a user journey with the first touch point being a Facebook prospecting ad. So the person saw a Facebook prospecting ad, they go to the site, they leave, they come back via Google search, and then they leave again. They see a remarketing ad on programmatic, so it could be on a platform through a program like StackIt, like we said before, and then they ultimately go to the site directly through typing the website into their browser, and they end up purchasing. This person who we're talking about, let's just say that their purchase was worth $500. If we look at the default for at least universal analytics, and for what marketers have been using for a really long time, which is a last click model, that's what you would see. You would see that there's $0 attributed to Facebook, Google, and programmatic, and the full credit goes to direct. Because by default, we're going to assign full credit to the last touch point. Another popular thing that marketers will do is work within the platforms. It's easier to work within the platforms. That's where we typically spend most of our time, and especially when there's different people managing different platforms. And here, we'll see $500 attributed to each of these platforms. If there's $500 attributed to each of these platforms, instead of this conversion being worth $500 to us, it's suddenly worth $2,000 to us, which does not match the $500, which is in the bank. So there you have a problem. And there's other models as well, which are also role-based models. So role-based models would be something like last click. There's other ones. A very popular one would be position-based, where we would basically take 40% of the conversion and assign 40% to each the first and last touch. So that would be 40% goes to Facebook prospecting, 40% to direct, and then split the remaining 20% equally amongst all middle touch points. This makes sense intuitively, right? It makes sense to say that the user the first touch point that a user took to get to your site was their introduction to the brand, and that should mean something, right? Like without that first touch point, like you really can't get anywhere. The last touch point also has to be a very important one because that's the one that actually had them convert, and then the middle ones are something we don't really know what, so we kind of just make it up. But it's intuitive, it makes sense, but it's not really based on any data. It's really just a best guess, and that's pretty much what's been used very predominantly over the last couple of years, especially by smaller advertisers who don't have a huge budget to put into what's called a data-driven attribution software, which are typically very expensive and are viewed as a black box where like nobody knows what's happening inside. They're just spitting out numbers which we can't understand, which are thereby really hard to explain to leadership and just kind of not worth the hassle. So what we want to do today is first just understand that the problem with these, so we mentioned some of the problems, the other problem is that we want to solve for is that position-based, we're using the same exact model for every business, right? Every business that we apply that to. Does it make sense that a business that has a lead time of 2 days has the same attribution model as a business that takes like 3 months to convert? It doesn't, but that's what you're doing when you're using these role-based models. So we want to move away from that and move towards a data-driven model. And what I'm going to attempt to do now is clear up some of, try attempt to simplify what these data-driven models are actually doing so that they're less of a black box and more of something that's at least somewhat understandable. There are two main models which are used. These are machine learning models, which are used for data-driven attribution. First one is Markov chains, which you may have heard of as a buzzword in the machine learning world. That's not what we're going to cover today. Second one is called the Shapley model, or the Shapley value. It's a model that was, I guess, invented, if that's the word you say, in 1951 by Lloyd Shapley, who was a Nobel laureate in economics. And it's really an economic model because this problem of attribution, how do you assign credit, is not specific to marketing. How do you assign credit, credit can also be defined as how do you split up ownership in a fair way? How do you assess the value of different variables in any situation where there's multiple variables, right? So you have a recipe and you change up a couple of things, like which changes actually made an impact? And this is very widespread in everyday life. This comes up all the time, which is why there are models in economics within game theory in order to explain this. So this is the equation, and emphasis on equation, again, not a black box, for the Shapley value. And basically what it says is, and we'll kind of go deeper after, but what it says is that the Shapley value is equal to the marginal value, to the weighted marginal value of every permutation of the specific variable that you're trying to account for. Now, we'll get to that in plain English in a second. Okay. So, going back to our initial example, and we're gonna look at these as user journeys, kind of going away from them being a specific user journey because multiple people are going to take the same journey, right? So there's not only one person, hypothetically, who goes from Facebook prospecting, followed by Google search, followed by programmatic retargeting, and then direct is their journey. We have to be working within large data sets. You cannot use a data-driven model when you're starting a business. It's going to take some data in order to be able to use it, because by definition, it is using data, which you have to have. But these are, let's say, two potential user journeys that people take before converting. So, over here you see two different ones. They're exactly the same, except for one difference. The second one has Google search as a second touch point. The first one is missing Google search as that second touch point. And if we look at the conversion rates for each of these paths, or each of these journeys, the second one, with all 4 touch points, has a 5% conversion rate. The first one has a 4% conversion rate, which tells you that the difference between a 5% and a 4% is 25%. So the increased probability of conversion for Google search is 25% in this specific example. And this is only one example. What's happening is that this is just as many as I fit on the paper before I gave up, but there are many, many, many different permutations and different ways that people can get to the site, different journeys that they can take. But the model is essentially doing the same thing over and over again. It's looking for, let's say, when we're solving for Google search, it's looking for all journeys which have Google search, the same journeys without Google search, and doing that same calculation of the difference in conversion rate for each of them. And once you do that across all these different journeys, and it's way, way more than this, because someone can have Google search 5 times, right? Versus only one. Someone could have Facebook a couple of times in their journey. They're not really limited to only one of each of these platforms. But once you do that many, many times, you take a weighted average. Weighted because if someone has if there's one person who has one of the journeys compared to one person who has the similar journey without, let's say, Google search, we obviously want to give less of an importance to that than the journey that has 1,000 users on it. We basically take a weighted average, and that is how we get to the marginal contribution of that user. So back to this initial slide. For data-driven attribution, this is an example of what it can look like. We're taking the marginal value, we're plugging it in. In this case, for Google search, let's say it ends up being 25% once we it ends up coming to 25% of our overall revenue once we do all the calculations across the board, which is why it's a model that a machine would do instead of a user, but a user could technically do it if they wanted to work on this forever. it would come to, let's say, $200 for Facebook, $125, which is 25% for Google search, $145 for programmatic remarketing, and then another $30 for direct, coming up to $500. So we only have $500, which equals the $500 in our bank, and at the same time, we have a more fair way of dividing up the values. As time goes on and we continue to get more and more data in, this will change. So it's changing on an ongoing basis, which is important because these aren't just random numbers. What these numbers indicate is user behavior. Because we're talking about user journeys, right? These are actual things people are saying to us. And what we're doing is we're taking what they're saying and we're reacting to it and assigning values accordingly. And then when we go back to optimizing accounts, to optimizing specific campaigns, we can go in with more of an understanding of what the actual impact of each touch point is, of each channel, of each campaign, whatever you're looking at, have a better sense of what's going on, and then hopefully make better business decisions. One last thing to incorporate here is there's a huge problem with view-through conversions within what we would call, I think you guys call them wall channels, right? I don't know, that's how they only from Stack It Up people. But anyhow, within social platforms, where they don't give us any view-through data. So a lot of programmatic platforms give us really detailed view-through data. So they'll say, oh, there was a view at 5 o'clock on Monday, and then there was a conversion at this time, and then we can kind of plug this into the model back into the data set, which is a data set that you're either exporting from analytics or that you are creating internally. But analytics only collects clicks, not views. So what happens when you have a platform like Facebook, which we primarily see the majority of Facebook conversions being view-throughs, meaning that somebody views the ad, never clicks on it, and then ends up converting. But if they don't come to the site, we can't really track them, and that's going to throw off all our attribution. So in order to deal with this, and this is an actual problem which there's no clear solution for, so we're not going to give you any, keys to make it completely go away. But what a lot of the attribution softwares do is that they model it out very much in the black box area again. What we have done, and it works depending on the volume of your campaigns, is attempt to segment it. So if we look at, let's say on Facebook, at a specific ad, at a specific hour, if we can get that conversion by itself, instead of 5 conversions, we're only seeing 1 conversion. We match that up with our value. So there was that 1 conversion for $500 at 5:30 on Thursday, then we can match that up, and then we'll have a sense, oh, that was actually this purchase, because I see there's only 1 purchase at that time for $500 in my internal database, which is what we do to try to help with that problem. We also want to keep in mind that due to the view-through problem, the data is always a little bit skewed, and we want to keep that in mind when we're optimizing, specifically within platforms where view-throughs are such a huge concern. I guess that's it. Anyone have any questions?